how has keeping lizards changed you as a keeper and your view on the hobby?
Keeping lizards. Well, it definitely has made me less of a lazy keeper. That is for sure. Snakes have a tendency to it's just not the same as lizards, which is sort of what made me hesitant about lizards to get into. But it made me start to look at how I keep my snakes, lighting, UV, heat, caging, etc. I think you get better feedback from lizards than you do snakes, or more immediate feedback. It also, taking a chance on something that, you've been really wanting to keep. And I guess probably the biggest thing is that when you fall into your niche in the hobby, whatever species you keep, for me it was Morelia, you don't realize how many other sectors of the hobby that there are. So it's like starting all over again. I equate it to, I can play blues guitar really, really, really good, but when I'm trying to learn fingerstyle classic guitar, it's like starting all over again. But I have the foundation to sort of jump off of that. So yeah, it's completely different, and it's refreshing, and it's exciting. And from a natural history standpoint, the more you know about the cosmic octopus, the better keeper you ultimately be. Going to Australia, I've always so focused on pythons that I overlooked everything else. So I think keeping lizards has also affected my field herping. This last trip we went to Southern California, I was paying attention to so many different species of lizards.
What did you learn from trying to keep every python species?
Some species are just tough, and you can't put every python in the same box. I had this idea that it's a python, why would it be different? Surprisingly, I've kept 35 species of python throughout my herp career, all of the scrubs except king horneye, all the carpets except imbricata, gamma range. I've kept northern and southern white lips, ring pythons, balls, angolans, retics, berms, Indians, Sri Lankans, Afroks, just all the Antaresia, except pygmy bandids, Asphidites, Liasis. It really made me believe that was kind of too big of a goal because of the amount of space that would take up. And I was trying to make my own personal arc, if you will. And I really wanted to focus on pythons so that I had a really well-rounded understanding of how pythons work. And I think being hands-on with them in your snake room really gives you that experience that you can't get from anything else. And a lot of the species have their own quirks, like poplin pythons. The strength of that animal is just amazing. Like, a lot of people will talk about retics and they'll talk about berms and other big pythons like Afroks and stuff like that, but nothing I've found is anywhere close to what a poplin python. White lips cough up hairballs, rings are cannibalistic. I mean, I don't know, there's so many species that are challenging. I guess with all the legislation that was coming down, I thought that it would be a good idea to sort of have at least a pair of every type of python that I could get. But like I said, it became an unrealistic goal with the space I have. So currently my focus is Aussie pythons. So I think I have 18 species currently. My main goal is to one day keep, breed, and have herped all the species of Australian pythons, because that's really where my love has always been. So,
has anything from learning/playing music translated over to herps and vice versa?
I often use a lot of scenarios with music to both the herp hobby and keeping herps, and even myself. I think the idea, so I play guitar, but the idea has always been to try to get your own identity. That really resonates with me when it comes to reptiles. I think people, and even in my early days, I got caught up in looking for what was cool and trying to follow someone else's path rather than follow my own path and really be excited about what I'm doing. I find that more and more the friends that I have don't keep the same species that I keep, but we are able to, it's sort of opens my mind to different ideas, when I'm talking to other people that have different experiences. In order to be someone in music, it seems like you have to have a certain piece of equipment, whether it's a guitar, a pedal, certain drums, whatever. And I think the same sort of falls into Reptiles, I guess, unfortunately. But if you don't work with this species, then you don't have credibility. Whereas you could have somebody that has 8 snakes. They have a tremendous amount of knowledge. I mean, Rob Stone, good friends of you and me, we both know what he's kept over the years, but currently his collection is pretty small. But I would challenge anybody to sort of go up against him when it comes to reptile knowledge. So yeah, I don't know. Things like that. Yeah, it's kind of like MPR currently, right? And have grown over the past years in different directions. And we've done so many different things over the past 10 years. And, where we are now is like our collections couldn't be it's almost like we sort of crossed and we're opposites now to where we were when we started, where my collection is a lot smaller, more focused. His collection is a lot of colubrids and, but somehow it works because he has a different experience than I do. And I guess it's sort of like what you're saying with the band, right? You have somebody that's into reggae, somebody that's into rock, somebody that's into jazz, but you put them together and then they make something very unique. I think that's the key to happiness. And if you want to, you want this to be a pleasant experience, don't do what somebody else is telling you to do, or your influences, even if you have people that you look up to and you may want to keep something completely different than what they're doing, but you just like the way they think. Like me and Rob, our collections couldn't be more opposite, but we can also have conversations about things, and he has different viewpoints. Then it just opens up your mind and keeps you from being stuck in your box, so to speak.
How do you stay focused in your collection after having guests on your podcast with really cool stuff or species that grabs your interest?
Yeah, this has been a tough one for me over the years. I'm always, like I said, I'm always excited when I'm talking to someone who is excited about what they're doing. It requires a tremendous amount of discipline, but I think doing the show has taught me that I can take things from those keepers and apply it to the species that I'm excited about. And to swing it back to music, it's sort of like what we talked about in the previous question. It's kind of like, do I learn Van Halen riffs, or do I learn the riffs and apply it to what I'm doing, not copying it directly, but taking inspiration from him and figuring out what he does and how to apply his principles or foundation into what I do. So that's sort of where I'm at now with people influencing me. Every once in a while, I'll be caught by something, but for the most part, I've been pretty focused over the past, say, 5 years. Whereas before that, it was just as soon as you would talk to somebody, next week it would be coming in the mail, which is, yeah, good and bad. I think there must be some kind of dopamine hit I would get from the hunt of the snake, finding the snake and buying the snake. And I've sort of replaced that with books. So, because books don't eat and books don't, you don't have to clean them. You don't have to keep them at a temperature. And I think I get that same thing from that. But in the early days of MPR, it was kind of a selfish thing in that I was wanting to learn about as much as I could from as many people as I could about Morelia. And, I would just be so hyper focused on that. Whereas nowadays I try to sometimes venture outside of that, of what I'm keeping, and try to talk to people that maybe are keeping different things than I am. And there's other people out there that can gain something from that. And I mean, we are Morelia Python Radio, so it's kind of a little bit of a niche thing. But just because I'm talking to somebody about white-lipped pythons doesn't mean I have to run out and buy some white-lipped pythons, because I've had them, I worked with them, they weren't for me. They just weren't, they didn't fit in what I was trying to do.
What have you learned or brought into how you're keeping your collection from herping the U.S.?
A ton. First and foremost, I think that I have always had this idea that North American species were easy, boring, entry level would be things that would come to mind. And I guess I guess just because when I was coming up in the hobby, a corn snake or a garter snake was something that you started with. And once you had that down, then you might have graduated on to like a ball python or a Burmese python. It's a little bit different nowadays, right? Because there's such availability of all these different species that you can kind of just jump into where you want to go. But like finding the Coleonyx like we did in Texas, that blew my mind that there's a leopard gecko type of gecko in the US that I had no idea about. Shame on me for not knowing that. I guess it's like whatever is local to you is kind of boring, but to somebody else in some other part of the world, it's exciting. I think of Scott, and he's calling carpets crappets because he finds them all the time and they're so common in his backyard and they're in his shed or in his attic or whatever. And I sort of maybe have that same look for, say, a garter snake. But again, it's made me appreciate things more. It's a little bit easier to herp in the US, and I think probably learning about just the environment and seeing the whole picture is really what's changed me as far as how I keep. This last trip we went to Southern California, and again, even though it was, I guess the fact that it was a desert similar to what we saw in Texas, but still different, and still such a variety of species. And to your point, right, a racer that I guess if I was flipping through a book or looking on Instagram or something, I probably would just keep on going, or if I saw it at a show or something like that. But there's something about when you see it in the wild that just totally changes your whole, at least for me, it changes my whole idea of that species. And I think I've been trying to like really focus on like the herps of Pennsylvania, right? Because, we got some cool species here. And again, to your point, like that you made earlier, I have no interest in really finding a hellbender. I think it would be cool, and I probably would love it if I saw it, but it's not something that I would go hunting for. But I think Nipper would probably cut off his left arm to see one. And I think for me, I'm sort of a visual learner. Like it's one thing to read it in a book, but it just sort of like just cements it into my brain when I can connect a visual with what I've read about or somebody's talked to me about it. And I think what I've been trying to do is just have an understanding of how just nature works. And just watching it in my backyard with the animals, and like, okay, the temperature drops down to this, and then overnight you're not necessarily going to see snakes come out, but as it starts to warm up, and even though that temperature is still dropping down at night, you start to hear the frogs call, and then soon after that you start to see the garter snakes come out of hibernation, and and then the birds that and how that all affects everything. And like you can sort of watch it daily, as opposed to like if I'm going to Australia to sort of see it, I have 10 days to sort of take it in. So it's sort of like I look at it like kind of like training, right? Because it's a lot easier to do it every day. And if you're out there looking at your environment, you start to get an eye for like I noticed that like if you go out to my yard and you sort of sit there and you just remain motionless for like 10 minutes, then all of a sudden things start moving, and you're like, how did I not see that before? And I'm just like really trying to train my eye, because when I do only have 10 days, I want to try to see as much as I can.
Where do you see herpeticulture going in the next decade?
Well, if we can keep it, I think it will push the way that we keep animals to the next level. Technology is sort of kept catching up with knowledge, and it's kind of amazing to see. I think we're sort of in this weird time. I very rarely go on Facebook, but I did today, and there was some post about how toxic some of the groups are, and we all know that how that can be, but it's always this like old school against new school type of thing. And I tend to think that maybe we're in a transition between the two. And I think some of the newer people that are coming in are looking at this from a different perspective. And maybe it's because more people are herping. Maybe it's because I truly believe, and it sort of happened to me, I was a big morph person for the longest time. And when you see, that speckled rattlesnake in its environment, why would you want it to be anything but what it looks like? And I think that a lot of keepers today are keeping more naturalistic, which has a tendency to sort of want to make the animal you're keeping in that, cage look as natural as the environment that you're trying to recreate. I hope that, technology will take us to the next level where keeping, I don't think we even have scratched the surface in understanding, especially snakes. It seems to me that part of the hobby is sort of starting to slowly catch up in understanding snakes on a whole different level. And it's I find it quite exciting, but as long as you stay out of the drama between the two groups fighting with each other rather than try to work with each other. I hope that it becomes more of a place where you promote your ideas in a positive way rather than trying to knock somebody else's idea down in order to make your idea better, if that makes sense. I think great things, man. I think that keeping and it's great to see more and more, years ago when I was into snakes, when I was a teenager, it was sort of taboo to be into snakes. And now it's sort of like looked upon as, oh, you have a pet snake? That's cool. I have a bearded dragon, or I have a leopard gecko, or I have, a corn snake, or, carpet python, or whatever. And I'm seeing more and more people that have that, which is good.